It was a distinct luxury to be aware that the water in the Carrara marble bath was perfumed with Florentine iris. Circumstances such as these seemed to become personal possessions, and even to lighten somewhat the burden of toil. Rosalie Vanderpoel married an Englishman of title, and part of the story of her married life forms my prologue. Hers was of the early international marriages, and the republican mind had not yet adjusted itself to all that such alliances might imply. It was yet ingenious, imaginative, and confiding in such matters. A baronetcy and a manor house reigning over an old English village, and over villagers in possible smock frocks, presented elements of picturesque dignity to people whose intimacy with such allurements had been limited by the novels of Mrs. Oliphant and other writers. The most ordinary little anecdotes in which vicarages, gamekeepers, and dowagers figured were exciting in these early days. Sir Nigel Anstruthers, when engraved upon a visiting card, wore an air of distinction almost startling. Sir Nigel himself was not as picturesque as his name, although he was not entirely without attraction when, for reasons of his own, he chose to aim at agreeableness of bearing. He was a man with a good figure and a good voice, and but for a heaviness of feature, the result of objectionable living, might have given the impression of being better looking than he really was. New York laid amused and at the same time charmed stress upon the fact that he spoke with an English accent. His enunciation was in fact clear-cut, and treated its vowels well. He was a man who observed, with an air of accustomed punctiliousness, such social rules and courtesies as he deemed it expedient to consider. An astute worldling had remarked that he was at once more ceremonious and more casual in his manner than men bred in America. "If you invite him to dinner," the worldling said, "or if you die, or marry, or meet with an accident, his notes of condolence or congratulation are prompt and civil. But the actual truth is that he cares nothing whatever about you or your relations, and if you don't please him, he doesn't hesitate to sulk or be astonishingly rude, which last an American does not allow himself to be as a rule." By many people Sir Nigel was not analysed but accepted. He was of the early English who came to New York, and was a novelty of interest, with his background of manor house and village and old family name. He was very much talked of at vivacious ladies' luncheon parties. He was very much talked to at equally vivacious afternoon teas. At dinner parties he was furtively watched a good deal, but after dinner, when he sat with the men over their wine, he was not popular. He was not perhaps exactly disliked, but men whose chief interest at that period lay in stocks and railroads did not find conversation easy with a man whose sole occupation had been the shooting of birds and the hunting of foxes, when he was not absolutely loitering about London with his time on his hands. The stories he told, and they were few, were chiefly anecdotes whose points gained their humour by the fact that a man was a comically bad shot or bad rider, and either peppered a gamekeeper or was thrown into a ditch when his horse went over a hedge, and such relations did not increase in the poignancy of their interest by being filtered through brains accustomed to applying their powers to problems of speculation and commerce. He was not so dull but that he perceived this at an early stage of his visit to New York, which was probably the reason of the infrequency of his stories. He, on his side, was naturally not quick to rise to the humour of a big deal, or a big blunder made on Wall Street, or to the wit of jokes concerning them. Upon the whole, he would have been glad to have understood such matters more clearly. His circumstances were such as had at last forced him to contemplate the world of money-makers with something of an annoyed respect. These fellows, who had neither titles nor estates to keep up, could make money. He, as he acknowledged disgustedly to himself, was much worse than a beggar. There was Stornham Court in a state of ruin, the estate going to the dogs, the farmhouses tumbling to pieces, and he, so to speak, without a sixpence to bless himself with, and head over heels in debt. Englishmen of the rank which in bygone times had not associated itself with trade had begun at least to trifle with it, to consider its potentialities as factors possibly to be made useful by the aristocracy. Countesses had not yet spiritedly opened milliners' shops, nor belted earls adorned the stage, but certain noblemen had dallied with beer and coquetted with stocks. One of the first commercial developments had been the discovery of America, particularly of New York, as a place where, if one could make up one's mind to the plunge, one might marry one's sons profitably. At the outset, it presented a field so promising as to lead to rashness and indiscretion on the part of persons not given to analysis of character, and in consequence relying too serenely upon an ingenuousness which rather speedily revealed that it had its limits. Ingenuousness, combining itself with remarkable alertness of perception on occasion, is rather American than English, and is therefore, to the English mind, misleading. At first, younger sons who gave trouble to their families were sent out. Their names, their backgrounds of castles or manors, relatives of distinction, London seasons, fox hunting, Buckingham Palace and Goodwood races formed a picturesque allurement. That the castles and manors would belong to their elder brothers, that the relatives of distinction did not encourage intimacy with swarms of the younger branches of their families, that London seasons, hunting and racing were for their elders and betters, were facts not realised in all their importance by the republican mind. In the course of time they were realised to the full, but in Rosalie Vanderpoel's 19th year they covered what was at that time almost unknown territory. One may rest assured Sir Nigel Anstruthers said nothing whatsoever in New York of an interview he had had before sailing with an intensely disagreeable great-aunt who was the wife of a bishop. She was a horrible old woman, with a broad face, blunt features and a raucous voice, whose tones added acridity to her observations when she was indulging in her favourite pastime of interfering with the business of her acquaintances and relations. "I do not know what you're going chasing off to America for, Nigel," she commented. "You can't afford it, and it's perfectly ridiculous of you to take it upon yourself to travel for pleasure as if you were a man of means, instead of being in such a state of pocket that Maria tells me you cannot pay your tailor. Neither the bishop nor I can do anything for you, and I hope you don't expect it. All I can hope is that you know yourself what you're going to America in search of, and that it is something more practical than buffaloes. You had better stop in New York. Those big shopkeepers' daughters are enormously rich, they say, and they are immensely pleased by attentions from men of your class. They say they'll marry anything if it has an aunt or a grandmother with a title. You can mention the Marchioness, you know. You need not refer to the fact that she thought your father a blackguard and your mother an interloper, and that you have never been invited to Broadmere since you were born. You can refer casually to me and to the bishop, and to the palace too. A palace, even a bishop's, ought to go a long way with Americans. They think it's something royal." She ended her remarks with one of her most insulting snorts of laughter, and Sir Nigel became dark red and looked as if he would like to knock her down. It was not, however, her sentiments which were particularly revolting to him. If she had expressed them in a manner more flattering to himself, he would have felt that there was a good deal to be said for them. In fact, he had put the same thing to himself some time previously, and in summing up the American matter had reached certain thrifty decisions. The impulse to knock her down surged within him solely because he had a brutally bad temper when his vanity was insulted, and he was furious at her impudence in speaking to him as if he were a villager out of work whom she was at liberty to bully and lecture. "For a woman who is supposed to have been born of gentle people," he said to his mother afterwards, "Aunt Marion is the most vulgar old beast I have ever beheld. She has the taste of a female costermonger." Which was entirely true, but it might be added that his own was no better, and his points of view and morals wholly coincided with his taste. Naturally, Rosalie Vanderpoel knew nothing of this side of the matter. She had been a petted butterfly child, who had been pretty and admired and indulged from her infancy. She had grown up into a petted butterfly girl, pretty and admired and surrounded by inordinate luxury. Her world had been made up of good-natured, lavish friends and relations, who enjoyed themselves and felt a delight in her girlish toilettes and triumphs. She had spent her one season of belledom in being whirled from festivity to festivity, in dancing in rooms festooned with thousands of dollars' worth of flowers, in lunching or dining at tables loaded with roses and violets and orchids, from which ballrooms or feasts she had borne away wonderful favours and gifts, whose prices, being recorded in the newspapers, caused a thrill of delight or envy to pass over the land. She was a slim little creature, with quantities of light feathery hair like a French doll's. She had small hands and small feet and a small waist. A small brain also, it must be admitted, but she was an innocent, sweet-tempered girl with a childlike simpleness of mind. In fine, she was exactly the girl to find Sir Nigel's domineering temperament at once imposing and attractive, so long as it was cloaked by the ceremonies of external good breeding. Her sister, Bettina, who was still a child, was of a stronger and less susceptible nature. Betty, at 8, had long legs and a square but delicate small face. Her well-opened steel-blue eyes were noticeable for rather extravagant ink-black lashes and a straight young stare which seemed to accuse, if not to condemn. She was being educated at a ruinously expensive school with a number of other inordinately rich little girls, who